Good morning. About time to begin our Bible class hour this morning. Good to see everybody here. Before we get started, let's begin with a word of prayer. Let's pray. Dear most kind, gracious Father in heaven, so grateful for all the blessings you've given us, Father. Grateful for this Lord's Day and opportunity we have to assemble together this morning, Father, worship you, and grateful for the freedom we have to do that, Father, and freedom to worship you openly, and grateful for this Bible class hour we can come together, Father, and study from your word, and pray that as we study from your word, we'll always be good stewards of your word, that we'll rightly divide it, Father, and better learn more what our duties are to you, and pray for your blessings upon us as we open your word this morning, Father, and pray for your forgiveness for any sins that are missed in our life. I know that we're human in the sin each day, and just pray for your continued blessings upon us, Father. We can be better every day, and thank you for all the sick that we have that's been able to return to us, Father, those that have received a portion of help back into them, and pray for continued blessings upon all those that we're mindful of, Father, whether they're sick or hurting or grieving over the loss of loved ones or whatever the case may be, Father. Just pray you'll be with those that we're mindful of and help them as only you can. Again, we pray that you'll be with us and bless us and help us as we go into the Bible class hour this morning, Father, and pray that we'll study your word with open minds and open hearts. In Jesus' name, amen. So I missed a couple of weeks of Bible class. So last week, me and Christy were out of town on Sunday morning, and then the week before that, obviously, was our gospel meeting. So we missed a couple of weeks, but it's good to be back, and we're going to pick up where we left off, a couple of weeks ago. But we had started in Matthew chapter 24. We introduced our outline for the chapter, which you can see on the screen here. It's sort of just overall how our study will go and how we'll divide the chapter into as we go through the study. We looked at the overall context in verses 1, 2, and 3. So this is the questions that Jesus' disciples asked him concerning, when shall these things be? And they asked him, basically when is the temple going to be destroyed, and what is going to be the sign of that and the sign of his coming again. So we looked at that, and then we got into the predictions concerning the destruction of Jerusalem. That's in verse 4. Last time we made it through verse 5, I believe, so we had verses 4 and 5. And so we're getting into the predictions that Jesus has made concerning the destruction of Jerusalem, and we're looking at the fulfillment so we can see of those predictions that Jesus made. And then of the predictions, we can further break the predictions Jesus made down into 5 sections. The first one being some initial predictions. So that's where it goes through about verse 8. So we'll begin in verse number 6 this morning. But we're still in what I'm calling the initial predictions. And these are initial because Jesus makes several comments, like verse 8. He says, all these are the beginning of sorrows. And then we notice in verse number 6, he says, these things are going to happen, but the end is not yet. So we talked about previously how the directions, the signs and the directions that Jesus has given, or I guess we could say the signs that Jesus has given, are the directions unto the time for the Christians to flee Jerusalem. So if you look down in around verse 15, then Jesus will tell them, this is when you see these things happen, now it's time to flee Jerusalem. So we sort of made the comparison of how Jesus' signs would be the same as the GPS today that are giving us a destination. So as you get close, your GPS will tell you, in 2 miles your turn is coming up, and then it'll usually tell you in a quarter of a mile your turn is coming up, and then when you get to it, it'll say, turn right now to go to your destination. So I think that these initial predictions through verse number 8 is roughly the equivalent of your GPS telling you your destination is coming in 2 miles, and the destination is the time, opportunity to flee Jerusalem. So Jesus tells them these things are coming. There's nothing that you need to do just yet. When you see these signs, just know that they're signs that it is coming. The end is not yet, but it's coming, and you don't need to do anything right now, but you just need to be aware. More or less, that's how I see the predictions as we go through the chapter. But so we made it through verse 5 last time. We'll pick up in verse number 6 this time. this morning. I don't think we'll make it past verse number 6. We'll probably spend all our time here this morning in verse number 6. But Jesus tells his disciples, he says, "And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." So in verse number 5, previously Jesus had warned them against the false Christ. He tells them that people are going to be coming in my name, claiming to be me. And we looked at some examples we saw through this period of time in history of those who had claimed to be Christ, and had either incited insurrections or lured people out into the wilderness. We saw there were several examples, throughout this time where people had claimed to be Christ and claimed to be these false Christs. So Jesus' prediction of that had come true, obviously. And this prediction will come true as well. One thing that I think that sticks out, to me for this verse is when we talk about when we think of wars, hear of wars and rumors of wars. So there's, as we mentioned before, in Matthew 24 is a difficult chapter, and there's a lot of misunderstanding in the religious world around the context and what's being talked about and what's not being talked about. But if case someone was trying to make an application of Matthew 24 to sometime during our lifetime, I think it would be really hard to fit the idea of wars and rumors of wars with not only during our lifetime, my lifetime, but probably potentially the entire history of the United States, because at least during my lifetime, there's been wars and rumors of wars almost consistently. When has there never been a time where there was a war or a rumor of war somewhere? It seems like it's always something is going on with somebody's fighting somebody, or there's a threat that the United States is facing somewhere or something. So if you were trying to make the application of Matthew 24 to something with our time, I think it would be incredibly difficult, because wars and rumors of wars are nothing new to us, right? It's something that's almost here all the time. And this is going to be incredibly significant as we look at why that was significant to the Jews here in Matthew 24. But I think we can make the point that, what wars and rumors of wars would we be distinguishing about as being signs of Jesus coming? How far do you go back? Because there's been so many. It would be hard to distinguish between now is the time he's talking about, or unless you just counted the entire, say 300 years or so of United States history. So anyway, I think we'll see that the fact that Jesus made this prediction to them made a lot of sense and was incredibly significant to them, and it would have stood out to the Jews at this time as being a significant event. So if you go back to about the 200 years or so prior to Jesus' birth, we'll just look at just briefly, try to get an understanding of, not necessarily the detailed history of this, but just understanding, the turbulent history that would have been in going on in Judea in about the 200 years prior to Jesus' birth. So around 140 BC, you had the establishment of what's called the Hasmonean dynasty. We talked about this a little bit a few weeks ago, where it was a series of kings and a series of Jewish kings who ruled Judea. And the king served in a dual capacity as king and high priest. So that was started in about 140 years, and then the Hasmonean dynasty lasted about 100 years. But during that time, the Hasmonean kings were initially they were a vassal of the Seleucid Empire, which is, another strong empire of the time, and we'll have a little bit more to say about one of the rulers there as we get into our study. But so they were a vassal of the Seleucid Empire for a period of time. Then they sort of gained their independence, and the Hasmonean dynasty was an independent kingdom there for several years. Now they became a client state of the Roman Republic, which is, they weren't, it's almost like a tributary or something of the Roman Republic. Rome was actually sacked. Jerusalem was actually sacked by the Romans in 63 BC. They come under Roman rule then. Then they come under, in 40 BC, they come under as a client state of the Parthian Empire. And then in 37 BC, Herod the Great takes over Judea. And then that's when they become under, when Judea becomes under, direct Roman rule after that period. But so if you think about just the 200 years prior to Jesus' birth, there was a lot of turbulence in the history, right? There was a lot of political and government upheaval. You have empires coming over and taking over the area. You go back and forth. So the idea of wars and rumors of wars would have been common during that time as well, right? You got all these things going on, all these nations coming in and taking over the area, the political aspects and all the things that go along with that. So for the 200 years prior to Jesus' birth, roughly, there would have been constant wars and rumors of wars, it seems. What's interesting is if you look at what happened to Judea after about 6 AD when they came under direct Roman rule, we see everything changes significantly. So this is from basically the introduction to the Jewish War, which is Josephus' account of the Jewish revolt against Rome. What it says about this time, starting in 86, it says, by 86, Judea was under direct rule by a Roman governor, a system that remained in place until the outbreak of the Jewish revolt in AD 66. So you've got 60 years of constant government, okay? Once Judea comes under rule of the direct rule of the Roman government, then you have a constant sustained government for 60 years, which was unheard of per se in the previous 200 years BC before that. You had this stable government, period of incredibly stable government. Also, it says the Jews had lived peacefully for many years in many parts of the Roman world, in diasporial communities in Asia Minor, Syria, Egypt, and indeed Rome itself had long been permitted by the Roman state to observe their own customs, such as the Sabbath, on the grounds of the venerable antiquity of these practices. Judea itself was only lightly governed, with a small number of auxiliary troops and a quiet junior governor who was not of senatorial rank, and it seems unlikely that the province was viewed by the Romans as potentially dangerous. Remarkable among the unique privileges permitted to the Jews were the pilgrimage festivals held 3 times a year in Jerusalem, at which huge numbers gathered in a fashion not permitted elsewhere in the Roman world. So you'll see that beginning in 6 AD, when Judea began to be ruled directly by the Romans, they had unprecedented peace. They had unique privileges within the Roman Empire itself. They had privileges where they were permitted to do things that nobody else in the Roman Empire was permitted to do. So not only was there a period of sustained government, peaceful government, but they had freedoms that they enjoyed that everybody else in the Roman Empire did not enjoy. So, that's incredibly significant, I think. You think about, number one, this is the period of Jesus' life. So when Jesus makes this prediction, the idea of wars and rumors of wars would have been really unheard of to the generation living at this time. There was about 60 years of stable government, so pretty much all of Jesus' life, about roughly the next 30 years after his death, was stable government, peaceful government. So the idea of wars and rumors of wars would have stood out to the Jews. It would be much different than somebody making the claim to us that there's wars and rumors of wars would be a sign of something, because we see them all the time. The Jewish world wasn't necessarily that way. I think you could say that this a period of peace. The Jews had lived peacefully for many years. That was probably unprecedented from all the way back to when Judah was allowed to return to Jerusalem. You think about when they were trying to rebuild the temple. We're told that they basically built with one hand, they had a sword in the other hand. So there was a lot of conflict, even from the initial time that they came back from the Babylonian captivity. But now we see that the Jews had been allowed to live peacefully with unique privileges, and had been able to, to do things in the Roman world that nobody else in the Roman world had been able to do. So I think that's interesting. We can see the significance of how when Jesus said wars and rumors of wars would be signs of something, it would have been significant to the Jews. So Tacitus was a Roman historian, and he wrote for about the time starting in about the 60s or so A.D. To about 100 or so A.D. But so he's looking at it from the Roman perspective. But what he says of this time, he says of the histories that he's given in this particular writing, he says, the history in which I am entering is that of a period rich in disasters, terrible with battles, torn by civil struggles, horrible even in peace. Four emperors fell by the sword. There were 3 civil wars, more foreign wars, and often both at the same time. So his description of the state of the Roman Empire definitely fit with the idea of wars and rumors of wars. And actually, the foreign wars there, one of the foreign wars would have been the Jewish war that was going on, the Jewish revolt at the same time. But Josephus, who was a Jew, originally he was a Jew who later became a Roman, he records how that the Jewish unrest in Jerusalem and the Roman world, how it led to results in a road to war with Rome in what they call the Jewish-Roman War. So I'd like to review some of that this morning. And if anybody's interested, if you want to read the book, it's really like a soap opera. So it's really hard to find a point that says, this is where it all began. But Josephus goes in incredible detail of documenting the entire thing, but it's literally like a soap opera about all the characters, what's going on. But so I've done my best to pick a time prior to when the conflicts began that was relatively peaceful, but you had some grievances, or you had some animosity amongst the Jews and the Romans, or whatever. But it eventually led to the Jewish revolt against Rome. And again, this would have been during a peaceful time, right, of stable government. Jesus says that wars and rumors of wars are going to be the sign of the beginning of these initial predictions. I think that's what we're seeing being fulfilled here in this section, is these wars and rumors of wars are exactly the fulfillment that Jesus was talking about. So we'll start in, there was a disagreement basically between the Jews and some Greeks in Caesarea. So the Jews in Caesarea had a synagogue adjoining a plot of land owned by a Greek in the city. They had made several attempts to purchase this land, offering a price many times its real value. The owner rejected all their advances, and to add insult to injury, he began developing his site with the construction of workshops right up to the boundary, which would leave the Jews with only a narrow and extremely constricted passageway to their synagogue. So I don't know, exactly, why is this Greek man doing this? Why does he want to frustrate the Jews? And why are the Jews so frustrated that this Greek person owned this piece of land next to their synagogue? But this is sort of where this is the best starting point I could see for the story without just going through the whole book. But you can see there was obviously some disagreement, some strife, and some frustration on both sides of this group here between the Jews and the Greeks. So Gessius Florus, who was the Roman procurator of Judea from 64 to 66 A.D., he takes a bribe of 8 talents to settle the dispute between the Jews and the Greeks in Caesarea. But instead, he takes the money and moves promptly from Caesarea to Sebaste. So, the Jews go to the leaders, hey, can you help us solve this issue? They even bribe him with 8 talents. He takes the money and runs and doesn't do anything. So the next day was a Sabbath, and the Jews assembling at the synagogue found one of the local opposition sacrificing birds on an upturned pot beside the entrance. The Jews were enraged at what they saw as an intolerable parody of their law and the desecration of their ground. 12 of their leading men joined in a delegation to Florus at Sebaste, where they deplored the recent event and begged his help, tactfully reminding him of those 8 talents. Florus actually arrested this party and had them put in prison. So now the Greeks are sacrificing birds right on the property line to the synagogue that the Jews take as an insult to their religion. So now they send men to Flores. He's out of town. He's moved to Sabas after they've already taken their bribe. They go to him, asking him for help again, reminding him, hey, we gave you this bribe in the past. I don't know if that was a threat to go to other authorities or whatever, but he didn't help them. He arrested these 12 leading men that were seeking his help. So this news caused further anger in Jerusalem, though the people still managed to contain their fury. But Florus, as if under contract to fan the war into flame, sent to the temple treasury and removed 17 talents, alleging that the money was required for imperial purposes. There was immediate chaos. Some of the radicals shouted obscene abuse at Florus and carried around a basket to collect small change for him, as if he were poor and destitute. So you can see the escalation on both sides, right? It's just the frustrations are escalating. It's eventually going to lead to war. But now Florus is taking money out of the treasury, and it's just now the Jews are mocking him, for doing that, saying he's poor. So you see the escalation on both sides. Florus then sends Roman cavalry and infantry to Jerusalem. He subsequently ordered his troops to ransack the upper market and kill anyone found there. The soldiers did not confine their attack to that area only, and instead burst into every house and slaughtered the inhabitants. Josephus says that Florus's attack had unprecedented brutality, that even babies were not spared, and 3,600 people were killed. 3,600 Jews were killed. In response to Florus's attacks, the Jews destroyed the colonnade linking the temple to the fortress at Antonia to keep Florus from reaching the temple. So I don't know exactly what this looked like, but apparently there was some kind of, it's referred to as a colonnade. I don't know if it was a bridge or what it was, but there was apparently a fortress, some kind of fortress at Antonia. And this fortress we'll hear about it multiple times as you go through this this book. It's mentioned several times, but apparently there was some kind of fortress beside or close to the temple, and it would have been linked to the temple by some kind of bridge or walkway or colonnade, whatever it was. But in response to Florus's attacks, they destroyed this colonnade so that he couldn't make it to the temple. King Agrippa warns of the consequences of war with Rome, so he's warning the Jews about going to war with Rome. He advises the Jews to pay taxes to Caesar and rebuild the colonnade linking to Antonia. The Jews accept his advice, and the threat of war temporarily ceases. But when Agrippa tried to convince the Jews to remain in submission to Florus until Caesar could send a successor, they could not stand for that. They cursed the king, pronounced his banishment from the city, and some even threw stones at him. So then Agrippa makes two warnings to the Jews about going to war with Rome. He says, first, perhaps some of you think that this will be some sort of conditional war, that the Romans will hold back once they have beaten you, rather than making an example of you to the rest of the nations by burning your holy city and annihilating your entire tribe. So it's sort of eerie that King Agrippa makes these statements, gives these warnings to the Jews, because that's exactly what happened. He also told them, if you go to war with the Romans, all these expatriate Jews will be massacred by their local enemies, and the misguided policy of just a few people will have every city running with Jewish blood. And again, this happened as well. So Agrippa is telling them, if you go to war with Rome, he's going to destroy the city of Jerusalem, he's going to destroy your temple, he's going to burn it to the ground, and he's going to annihilate the entire tribe of the Jews. He says also, the Jews that are living outside of Rome or outside of Jerusalem and other parts of the Roman Empire, they're not living in Jerusalem, but they're Jews living in other parts of the empire, they're going to be facing tremendous persecution. They're going to be killed, and every city is going to be running with Jewish blood. And maybe Agrippa was an incredibly wise man, because the two things that he said happened are exactly what happened. But Josephus says at this point in time, they've rejected Agrippa's advice to them. Josephus says the Jewish revolt was now in full swing as they launched an attack on the Roman garrison called Masada, taking it by surprise and establishing it as a Jewish garrison. At the same time, Eleazar, the son of the high priest Ananias, stopped the offering of sacrifice on the behalf of any foreigner and the receiving of their gifts. This laid the foundation for war with Rome, as it meant rejecting the sacrifices offered for the Roman emperor and the Roman people and the emperor. So again, you see this. Now the Jews have invaded a Roman garrison, taken this Roman garrison, established it as a Jewish garrison. They've stopped making sacrifices for the Roman people and the emperor, so that there's this constant escalation. So now Rome is going to take this as an insult, right? That you're not paying respect or sacrifice to the people or to the emperor. The Jews then drove out the insurgents of the city to take it back. They then set fire to the house of Ananias, the high priest, the place of Agrippa and Berenice, and the records office. The intent of burning the records office was to destroy the moneylender's records, making it impossible to enforce debts. The next day, they began a 2-day siege and capture of the fortress at Antonia. They then moved to take the Roman garrison on Jerusalem's western border. They slaughtered all the Roman soldiers except their leader, Metellus, after he swore to convert to Judaism. They did all this on the Sabbath. So now you've got the Jews disregarding the Sabbath day. Not only did they, not observe the Sabbath day, but they invaded this Roman garrison and killed Roman soldiers all on the Sabbath. It's sort of ironic, I think, that they took the leader and made him swear to convert to Judaism, but yet they weren't even observing one of the most important laws of Judaism, which was to observe the Sabbath. So then, remember when Agrippa told them that if you do this, if you go to war with Rome, then all the Jews living in other parts of the Roman world are going to be killed, and every Jewish city is going to be running, or every city is going to be running with Jewish blood. So that happened actually. So as the Jews revolt against Rome, they're taking these garrisons. Word spreads about all these things. There was a tremendous uproar, either by the Greeks or by the other Romans, and the Jews were killed in massive numbers in other parts of the Roman world. For example, in Caesarea, they killed 20,000 Jews in one day. In Sycophilus, I'm not sure how you say that, 13,000 were killed in one day. Ascalon killed 2,500, and Ptolemais killed 2,000. There's others that are mentioned. This is just a summary, sort of seeing there's a significant number of Jews that were killed outside of Jerusalem that had potentially not taken part in the revolt, but they were killed simply because they were Jews. And people living outside of Jerusalem heard that the Jews were revolting against Rome, and this was one of the results of that. So the Jews then took the Roman garrison called Cypros near Jericho and the garrison at Machaerus. So they're continuing their revolt, right? They've taken several garrisons at this point in time. A major discord occurred in Alexandria between the Jews there and the local Greeks. The Jews intended to burn the local amphitheater along with its inhabitants. Tiberius, the governor, tried to peacefully stop this discord, but the Jews simply ridiculed and cursed him. Tiberius then brought in 2 Roman legions stationed in the city along with 2,000 troops arriving from Libya. The whole city was awash with blood, with no pity for infants or the old, and 50,000 bodies were piled in heaps. So again, this incredible massacre of the Jews that are going on in these cities outside Jerusalem. With the current state of the Jewish revolt, the Roman general Cestius Gallus decided now that he could no longer stay uninvolved, and he then gathered a sizable force leaving Antioch. Cestius first took Chalabulon, a stronghold in Galilee, and then moved on to Caesarea, ravaging the land, killing a great number of inhabitants, looting their property, and burning their villages. He then moved with his army to Antipatris, then to Lydda, and then camped at Gibeon, about 6 miles outside Jerusalem. Seeing the war now coming close to the capital, the Jews abandoned the Feast of Tabernacles and went for their arms, rushing out to fight the Romans in spite of the feast and the Sabbath day. The Jewish anger was enough to win the day. About 515 Romans were killed, while the Jews lost 22. Cestius stayed put in his original camp for 3 days while the Jews occupied the high ground and kept watch on the approach route. So again, you've got a Roman response to the Jewish revolt. Now the Jews have been taking Roman garrisons. They've been killing Roman soldiers and in this revolt against Rome. Now Rome is responding to the revolt. You see them taking back all the garrisons and all the cities that the Jews have been taking. And on top of that, again, you see that the Jews completely abandoned the Feast of the Tabernacles and the Sabbath day, all in the name of fighting the Roman army. So it's sort of ironic in their response to it. They hold their religion, close to their heart. They hold their religion in deep respect, yet they abandon these feasts and the Sabbath day in the name of this revolt. So King Agrippa tried to attempt negotiation with the Jews, and he sent two associates, Borsius and Phoebus, who were well respected among the Jews. His hope was to either persuade them all to abandon hostilities or at least drive a wedge between the opposition and those who did not share their views. He guaranteed a pardon from all past offenses if they would lay down their arms and go back into allegiance to Roman rule. However, Phoebus was killed before he could utter a word, and Borsius was wounded but managed to escape. Any citizens who protested were belabored with stones and clubs and driven back into the city. So now King Agrippa is trying to negotiate a peace between the Jews and Rome. The Jews had wanted nothing to do with that peace. They killed the messengers, or tried to kill both of them. And now any citizens who protested were belabored with stones and clubs and driven back into the city. So they wouldn't even, the Jews would not allow their own countrymen to stand against this revolt. So seeing this internal dissension as his opportunity to attack, Cestius brought up his entire force, routed the Jews, and chased them back to Jerusalem. He then made his camp on the hill called Scopus, about 3/4 of a mile outside the city. So you see, when Jesus mentioned wars and rumors of wars, that I think what we see happen is exactly the idea of wars and rumors of wars. The Jews had some disagreements with some local people and some Roman governors, and there was this escalating frustrations and aggravations on both sides, and now it's led to the Jews revolting against Rome. They've taken Roman garrisons, killed Roman soldiers. Now Rome has responded. They've taken back the cities. They're taking back the cities that the Jews have taken. They're taking back all these garrisons that the Jews have taken. And now they've made it all the way to Jerusalem. So Cestius is 3/4 of a mile outside Jerusalem, ready to take the city. So this is as far as we'll go with this story as of right now. We'll sort of finish this, not necessarily not next week necessarily, but some of the events that Cestius partakes in as he goes through his attack to Jerusalem. We'll see they fit further predictions of Jesus that he gives later on in the chapter. So, but the point of this was just to show when Jesus said there would be wars and rumors of wars. We can see obviously look what happened during this time. There was plenty of wars, plenty of rumors of wars. You can imagine that all these individual attacks that the Jews made to these garrisons, word would get around. You've got tens of thousands of Jews killed in other cities outside Jerusalem around the Roman Empire as a response to the Jewish revolt. So in a very short period of time, the Jews went from what we could say was an unprecedented peace in the Roman world, a unique position of freedom in the Roman world, to a full-on battle with Rome. Now they're in a full-on battle, full-on war with Rome, and the General Cestius his present situation is he's literally at the gates of Jerusalem, outside the gates of Jerusalem, ready to invade the city. But like I said, we'll continue with Cestius' attack on the Jews a little bit later in the chapter, but this is a good stop point, I think, at least to see that Rome's response to the Jewish revolt and kind of where they are right now. So I think that's enough for this morning. We'll go and stop here. I know we got several minutes left, but I know there's a lot of reading, a lot of information, a lot of history, a lot of story associated with it. Maybe sort of hard to follow this. I'll try not to have this much just straight reading as we go through, but I think it was beneficial, from this perspective, to show how the wars and rumors of wars that Jesus was predicting, how they came to pass. When Jesus made the prediction, there was unprecedented peace in the Jewish world. So. Right, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, there's for sure, I think it's verse 34. And there's a couple times, even in chapter 23, where Jesus makes the statement that this is going to happen, come upon this generation. But yeah, that's true. Yeah, yeah, that is. It's sort of, it's a little bit surprising. I guess it's like anything, but maybe people overlook that one verse or what it is. But yeah, it's important to understand that all of Matthew 24, and that's really one of the points of this study, is to show that it was for that generation. Not only for that reason does it make it not really applicable to us, but for all the things we're showing here, like this morning, for example. Yeah. Yeah. Right. For sure, yeah. That's right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it's interesting if you think about, when we could say how what the Jews took for granted at this time, and it's the same for us. What do we take? What kind of blessings do we take for granted today? Mm-hmm. Yeah, there may be. I don't know either. But it is interesting. You think about um, what the unique place that the Jews had in the Roman world. Actually, Herod even married a Hasmonean princess, as So you think he was sort of in favor, and we know that he sort of um, he I'd say maybe pandered to the Jews somewhat. He spent all that money on the temple, remodeling the temple, and Herod's temple was so great. Um, and you think about that. You think about the place that they had in the Roman world, and you think, well, maybe they didn't uh, appreciate what they had. But I think we can make the same application to us today. I mean, we live. The Jews didn't do what God said, but look at us in the United States. We've got all the technology, all the freedoms. We've got the Bible available to us any time. But how often do we actually take advantage of these things, and how often do we take them for granted? Yep. Well, you talking about Pilate instead of Agrippa. You're talking about Pilate instead of Agrippa. But yeah, there was I mean, Paul was in a similar situation with, I think it was it Agrippa? Um, he said he'd let him go if he hadn't appealed to Caesar, right? Yeah. But any other questions, comments? All right, thank y'all. We'll pick up verse number 7 next week.